Hi, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the Self-Directed IRA Saturday. My name is Zach Wilson. I'm one of the IRA specialists here at Quest Trust Company. So I'm excited to cover the topic today, but first, we'll go through the introduction. First, let's do the disclaimer. So everything that you're about to see here is for your educational purposes only, right? It's really important to understand the role that Quest will play when it comes to your retirement investing. We're here to offer as many resources and as much education as we possibly can to our clients and investors. And we're also here to answer any sort of questions you may have, as well as facilitate the transactions within your retirement account. With that being said, Quest does not offer any sort of tax, legal, or investment advice, nor do we endorse any specific investment that you're looking to make. So due diligence is always key. A little bit about us, for those of you who don't know us, we are the largest self-directed IRA custodian in the state of Texas. We have roughly 20,000 active investor clients all across the country. We have over 2 billion in assets under administration. I think the latest number was 2.7 billion. We have over 100 employees, 34 of which are certified IRA service professionals. That means when you give us a call, not only you're not going to get an automated message, but you're going to get a Quest employee who's there to answer your questions. And if you want to take a deeper dive into some really nuanced topics, we have 34 IRA service professionals on staff there to take that dive with you. And as it stands right now, we have over $400 million in undirected cash sitting in our clients' accounts. That's where that pool of funds represents opportunity, right? Whether you're a current Quest client who's part of that pool, or you're an investor who needs funds to make your deals happen, this is where your opportunity lies. But before you make any investment at all, what's always the first step is to educate yourself. Guys, check out our YouTube channel. Check out our website on our education center. We have hundreds of videos going over everything from the basics of a self-directed IRA and making investments within that vehicle, all the way to the ins and outs of syndication investments and what implications that could have. So utilize us as a resource for your investments. But now that you've educated yourself, you feel comfortable with what type of investment you're looking to make, well, the deal's not just going to make itself, right? So you've got to take advantage of the networking opportunities. Join the live classes like you are right now on Saturdays and Tuesdays. Also, come check out our live networking events on the fourth Wednesday of every month that we have via Zoom. All right, it's our virtual happy hour. That's where we have nothing but networking going on. We have people come in, you introduce yourselves. Oh, well, I'm losing power. And you get to introduce yourselves, and you get to state what you're looking to invest in. But by far, our most common networking event is going to be our SD IRA social on the first, second, and third Tuesday of every month. This is going to be in Houston, Austin, and Dallas, respectively, on the first, second, and third Tuesday of every month at 6:30. How it works is you come in, and we have about 30, 45 minutes of networking, and then we have a speaker come out, right? They're going to present for about an hour. And then after that, we're going to allow for networking or even bringing back deal pitching. So if you have a deal, this is where you're going to get to meet some investors. And also, by far, our biggest event coming up is going to be the Quest Expo. I think we're about 33 days out. So I'm really looking forward to this because this is what's going to be the best value that we can offer you as a custodian. Oh man, we keep losing power. This is going to be, we have, I think 34 speakers coming out, including our presenter today. We're going to go over all kinds of topics. We're going to go over private money lending, notes investing. We're going to go over syndication. We even have a panel that's going to address inflation and how alternative assets can play a role in your portfolio. Guys, this is not just a self-directed IRA expo. This is an alternative asset expo in general. So really, please, 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 I guarantee you're not going to find a better value for the cost of the ticket. Now, if you have any questions at all, I'll be here. We have another IRA specialist, Nicole Bako, in the chat. She's going to be answering all of your questions that you have moving forward. So if you have any questions, please utilize that chat so you can answer them. And inevitably, when the questions pop up after we've ended, shoot an email over to myself or Nicole. We'd be happy to help you out. So without further ado, I'm really excited to go over this topic today. All right, we have something that we're going to go over that is without a doubt, I think, the most underutilized part of your investment process. Right before you make any deal, you have to do your due diligence. So here to go over how to dominate due diligence as a notes investor, we have Tracy Z. Tracy, you there?
Yeah, I sure am. Thanks, Zach, for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to have you. So, like I said, I'm really excited because I think this is the key that everyone kind of skips over, right? You learn about going to networking and you learn about, how to put your deal in place and you see the returns at the end, but no one realizes how important this due diligence step is.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's very important because we work hard to get our money and we want to hang on to it. We want to make a great return, but we also want to protect our principal. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, all as it relates to buying and selling notes. So note due diligence.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracy. And without that, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. So hello and welcome. I am Tracy Z. I have been buying and selling real estate notes for over 30 years. I got started in the late 1988, about 88. I went to work for a big, large institutional investor, and they invested their funds in seller finance notes. So believe it or not, it's been around a while. And when I went to work there, the gentleman I went to work for, he'd already been doing it for 30, 40 years. They've been doing it since the 1940s and 50s. So discounting notes has been around and we perfected it over the years. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. They make great investment vehicles for self-directed retirement accounts because of the tax-free or tax-deferred advantages. So they are secured by things we know and love, real estate, but you get to be the lien lord instead of the landlord. I've done other presentations for Quest. I always love being here on Saturday, and we talk a lot about how notes work and that. But today we're just going to deep dive in to knowing your destination and the 3 P's of note investing. And then we'll get into how you analyze the deal, 5 very important calculations. I promise not to scare you away too much with math. Some preliminary due diligence, because I like to do this in 2 phases. I like to perform my preliminary due diligence, which is stuff I can do online that don't have to spend money. And then if I like it, I move into the second phase, final due diligence. And we'll talk about, then there's a little bit of money you can spend there. So you like to get your preliminary due diligence done first because you can do all that online. And then we'll move into a little bit of the closing process. And of course, we'll look at a sample transaction because, we all learn best by looking at real deals. And we'll end up with some Q&A. So sit back, hopefully you got a cup of coffee or your favorite beverage, and we will get started. I am not an attorney, a financial advisor, or a tax advisor. All of this is for informational, educational purposes. It's just based on doing it for 30 plus years. All investments have some risk, but our job is to minimize that risk by performing good due diligence. So the first thing you got to ask yourself are, what are your goals? You can buy performing notes where you want to collect timely payments for long-term income. That's what most of us like with our self-directed retirement account. We're looking for that mailbox money. But there are some people that want to buy a non-performing note that's already behind in payments because they want to restructure that or rehab that note and then resell it for a profit. Or they might even want to take a non-performing note, go through the foreclosure process and end up owning the real estate through foreclosure or a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So when we buy a real estate note, someone else owns the real estate. We're like the bank. We get to collect those mortgage or deed of trust payments. That owner of the real estate, they have to pay the taxes and the insurance and the upkeep and the maintenance. As long as they do that, they have the right to enjoy that property. If they fall behind on their payments or their taxes or their insurance, you as a holder of that deed of trust or mortgage can exercise your rights just like a bank and tell them, hey, through your attorney, you need to bring that current. You need to make that payment. And if they don't, then you can actually foreclose and take the property back. My specialty, I love performing notes. I really like seller finance performing notes, but these strategies apply to non-performing notes as well, or to private lending as well, where you actually loan money. So if you are looking at getting into real estate notes, the first thing I encourage you to do is get really comfortable and familiar with the 3 P's. Well, what are the 3 P's? Well, the 3 P's of note investing are, number 1, the people. So that's the buyer, the payor, the borrower, the person that's making the payments. You want to know, what's the likelihood that they'll keep making those payments? Do they have that capacity? Do they have that history of making the payments? Another person in the transaction we sometimes forget to talk about as much is the seller, the person selling the note. Now, if you're originating the note as a private note, as a lender, you might not be dealing with the seller. You'll just be dealing with that buyer borrower. But if you're like me and you buy these existing seller finance notes, I want to know about the seller. I want to know about the person that sold the property and created that note. So who are they and why are they selling? The second P is the property. Remember, the person, the buyer, the payer doesn't make their payments. My collateral is that piece of real estate. So I want to underwrite that piece of real estate because in the worst case scenario, I'm going to end up with that piece of property if the people don't make the payments. And the third P is the paperwork. So the paperwork is what I use to enforce my lien. That's how I make sure it's valid. It's in first position. I like first position. Some people like second position, but you want to make sure all that paperwork's there. And we'll talk about that paperwork as well, because without the paperwork being there, you can't enforce your lien against the property if the people don't make the payment. So 3 Ps. I break up my due diligence in this whole presentation surrounding the 3 Ps. So you can always just come back to that in your mind. So what are the phases of due diligence? Well, phase 1 is deal analysis. I call this dating a note. Do I like the deal? Does it look good? Does it meet some preliminary level of interest that I have? And if it does, then I'll move into the preliminary due diligence. I'll dig a little deeper with some online research. And in phase 2, I'm going to perform my final due diligence. And that's usually where I'll order updated title and a BPO or broker's price opinion, some kind of valuation of the property. I'll be breaking this presentation up to those 2 phases. So phase 1 is that preliminary due diligence where we have our deal analysis. I call this the big picture. So what are the main valuation factors in the big picture? So the big picture starts out with the property. What kind of property is it? What's its value? What's its condition? Is it land? Is it a single family residence? Does the buyer live in it as their home, or are they renting the property out? Maybe it's mobile home and land. Perhaps it's mixed use. It's commercial. Is it rural? Is it central? What's the population? Is the demographics growing? I want to know, just like if I was buying a piece of real estate, I want to know about that piece of property that is securing my lien. Then I want to know the lien position. Is it first? Is it second? Is somebody ahead of me? As I mentioned, I like first, but if you do seconds, you want information on the first. If I'm buying first, I want to make sure things like real estate taxes and HOA dues are current. I look at the terms. The terms are the interest rate, the payment amount. Does it amortize, or do they own a big balloon at the end? Is it long-term? Is it short-term? Then we want to look at the performance. The performance means how have they been making their payments? Are they on time? Do they pay on the 1st? Do they pay on the 20th and it's due on the 1st? How are they performing? How long have they been performing? Equity, very important. And we'll go into these ratios, but this is how much skin in the game that buyer borrower has compared to what the property is worth. And then we have seasoning. Seasoning is how many or how long they've been making payments. And then we often look at the payer borrower's credit. So as we move into the 5 key calculations for deal analysis, we're going to look at LTV, loan to value. This is the balance owed by that borrower divided by the value of the property. The flip side of that is equity. So if we said somebody owed $70,000 on a $100,000 property, we say they have a 70% loan to value. They have 30% equity. That's a pretty good amount of skin in the game versus somebody puts 0 down and has 0 equity, or put 5% down and has 5% equity. Investment to value, ITV, that's a little bit different. As note investors, we can't control what the borrower already owes if we're buying an existing note, but we can control how much we'll invest in it. So investment to value is how much we're investing compared to the property value. So on that $70,000 note against a $100,000 property, if I only wanted to be in it a 50 investment to value, I'd only invest 50,000. If I wanted to be in it 65 investment to value, I'd invest 65,000. So you can kind of see how investment to value can be modified based on risk. We also look at yield or IRR. This one's a little more complicated because it takes into account time value of money. Most people in real estate are very used to doing an ROI, return on investment, or a cash on cash return, or they talk about cap rates. But you've got to remember, when you own a piece of real estate, you still own the piece of real estate in 20 or 30 years. If I buy a note and it pays off in 20 or 30 years, I don't own the piece of real estate, and the balance on the note's paid down to zero. That's not a bad thing. We just have to calculate our calculations. And to do that, we use something called IRR, internal rate of return, using time value of money. And that is something you just use a financial calculator for. We won't get into that in depth today, but that is an important piece of being a note investor if you plan on holding it long term. We also look at discount. Cool thing about buying notes is we buy them at a discount. So remember, I mentioned that $100,000 property, $70,000 note. Well, if I paid $65,000 for that $70,000 note, I just got a $5,000 discount. If I pay $60,000, I get a $10,000 discount. And anytime that I get it at a discount, it means whatever the interest rate on the note is, I'm going to make even more than that. So discount is kind of one of those cool bonus things of people who buy discounted notes. If you are a lender and you're just lending money, then you're just going to get the face rate of the note. That's not bad either, but it's just a different way to look at it. And then we like to back in, when we've done all those analysis, we've come up with what we want to pay for a note. We say, okay, what percentage is that of the unpaid principal balance? So that's your amount invested divided by the amount purchased. I only highlight these because we're going to look at it with a deal. So here's a deal. So this is a transaction in Dallas, Texas. It sold for $91,900. The buyer put $5,000 down. They used seller financing, and 6 years of payments had been made when we looked at this note. That balance had paid down to $75,834. It was at 9.5%, a good interest rate, at $800.29 a month. And there were 176 payments left. So if you amortized out $75,834 at 9.5% at $829 or $800.29, and you solved for N, you'd see there were 176 payments left. This had a nice property value of $110,000, and we are able to buy this note in an IRA for $68,430. So what I did was I made those numbers different colors so we could apply those calculations, because we're trying to see if we like this deal, if we want to date this note, right? If we want to go to the next step. So the blue is the balance, the unpaid principal balance. So $75,834. The purple is the value of the property, $110,000. So you take the balance the buyer owes, and you divide it by the value of the property, and you get 69%. That's 69% loan to value. Not bad. They got about 31% equity. If I take $68,430, the amount I'm going to pay for that $75,834 balance, I take that $68,430 in the pinkish red, magenta we'll call it, and divide it by the purple, $110,000, the value of the property, I get 62% investment to value. Also a decent investment to value. That means if I had to take the property back after expenses, I'd have 40% or almost 38 to 40% cushion there. If I take that price, $68,430, and divide it by what I'm buying, $75,834, I get 90% of UPB. So I'm getting about a 10% discount on that note. So my discount is the balance, $75,834, less what I'm paying, $68,430. So I got $7,400 in discount, or about 10%. Now here's where it gets interesting. Remember, the note rate was 9.5%. So if I paid $75,834 for $75,834 balance, I could expect to get 9.5% on my money, less whatever expenses there were. But because, remember, I paid $68,430 in the IRA, now I have 11.36% anticipated IRR return over time. And the cool thing about notes is if those pay off early, my yield goes up even more. Why? Because my discount gets paid off that much quicker. So this is a note that looked good from the preliminary analysis. So now I'm going to go into my little bit more detailed preliminary due diligence. So remember, we're going to start with the property. So what do I do when I'm looking at all of this from my comfort of my home office with some internet connection? I head out, type in the address in Google Maps, and I take a walk around the neighborhood. and I zoom out and I just take a look at it, see if I know the area, don't know the area. I buy a lot of notes in Texas, even though I'm located in Florida. I bought notes all over the United States. So I look at that. I look to Zillow, Realtor, Redfin, Trulia. I know those sites are not an exact, accurate reflection of values. Even Zillow can't believe their own values these days, right? But what they do is they give me some feeling for the neighborhood, and I can look at what some other properties have sold for. I look more at what's sold than what's for sale, but I look at both. And so it's a lot of great information we have at our fingertips. Believe me, when I started in 1988, before we got online, none of this was available. Our jobs are so much easier now as note investors and investors. I like to go and get some neighborhood information. Trulia used to be great for some crime scores and demographics, but they decided to take that off. So some of the replacements I use there is crimegray.org, mylocalcrime.com, spot crime. And if you want, you could even call the local police department and get a feeling for what the crime is in that area. I like to go to rentometer.com and look for market rents. I like, not because I'm going to rent the property out, because right, I'm the bank. I don't get to rent the property out unless for some reason I ended up with the property back. But why do I look at that? I like to see if people's payments for buying the home are at or less what market rent is, because most people would rather buy and then rent most of the time, not everybody, but if they can own a home for the same amount they can rent, or they can own a home for less than they can rent for, I know it would be pretty easy if one, they stay motivated, and two, it'd be pretty easy if I did have to take the property back, that I could resell it. If my seller has a prior BPO, which stands for broker's price opinions, kind of a drive-by analysis, comp analysis of the value, I like to look at that. They may or may not make that available. It's just one piece of preliminary information. I always go out to the county tax appraiser site and pull up the property profile. I learn a lot of stuff. Most of the time, what I'll learn is it's a manufactured home and not a stick-built home. That seems to be one of the most common things people forget to tell me, or maybe they thought somebody lived there and there's no longer a house there, something like that. I look at the tax assessor's info. It just gives me more than Google or Realtor or those sorts of things. And then I also go one step further and I go to the assessor's side of the county and I look at their tax status. I want to know if the real estate taxes are current, because remember, they can be a prior lien ahead of your deed of trust or mortgage. So that's very important. If there's a homeowners association, I try to get information on that as much as I can. And later, if I decide to go to the next step, I'll be sure that if there is a homeowners association, that the dues are current, because there are states that have what they call HOA super lien states, meaning that the HOA liens, if they go unpaid, can also go ahead of a mortgage or deed of trust. I like to call, if I am dealing with any kind of non-performing or a contract for deed or anything that's had a history of being sold, I like to make sure that the county and city are clear of any violations. These liens can also take priority. So what are we talking about? Maybe if it was repossessed or rehabbed, perhaps there's a lien out there where they didn't mow the grass, or a structure needed to be removed or something like that. So it's always good to check to make sure it's free of county or city liens. You can also go get a free flood cert. I like free, right? We all like free. At FEMA.gov to see if it's in a floodplain or not. And if it is, it can be helpful then to be sure your borrower also has flood insurance. So that's some preliminary steps I always take on the property. There might be other things that you see as you come up. I mean, if you were buying a commercial property, there would be other questions you'd ask. If you're buying land, different questions. If it's an investment property versus a home, but that's the kind of basic questions I like to look at on the property if it's just a regular single family residence. So now we're moving into the other P, the people. First, we'll look at the payer. That's that person making payments on that note and mortgage or note and deed of trust. So I want to see, what kind of skin do they have in the game? How motivated are they? So I like to look at their equity, and there's more than one place to get equity. They might have put a down payment. They could be getting equity through amortization, meaning that each month when that payment comes in, some goes to principal, some goes to interest. And so they're getting equity through amortization. Or if they've owned the property for any time in the last 5 to 7 years, they probably have some extra equity from appreciation, meaning that property value has gone up. I look at the occupancy. Are they living in it? Because if it's the roof over their home, time is told that they are more likely to continue paying. Investors, if they're cash flowing, will pay, but if it's not cash flowing or there's big property management expenses or values fall, or if they can't refinance, or if they have an arm and their rates go up, investors tend to have more risk and generally sometimes can have more chance of default. Right now, that hasn't been the case, but as markets turn, I think that will go back to being maybe a little bit more true, that there's a little bit more risk on investor properties than there are on owner occupants. It's the same reason that banks usually require more money down and have lower loan to values when they lend to investors than they do to owner occupants. Seasoning, what's that? Well, it's not a spice, right? Seasoning in the note world is the note well seasoned? Meaning, how long have they been making payments? So does it have a track record? I buy notes that don't have years of track record, like 6 years, like this last one we just looked at. But if they don't, I'm going to balance my scales and make sure all the other things are really good. Speaking of seasoning and payment history, you want to verify that payment history. You don't want somebody to say, oh, well, they've been making payments 6 years. Oh, that's great. Okay, so is that through a third-party servicer? Can I get their payment history? Oh, no, we don't have one of those. They just make my payments to me direct. Oh, okay, can I get a copy of the deposits, your bank statements where that's been deposited? Oh, no, they just pay me cash. So sometimes you got to be careful, because I'm not saying sellers will lie to you, but you do want to trust but verify, as the saying goes. If there is a servicer, I want to get their servicing notes. What are servicing notes? Well, these become more important when you're looking at non-performing or re-performing notes, where they used to be behind and now they got caught up. So you just want to see what the conversation, what the dialogue has been with that payer borrower. If that servicer or that seller is escrowing for taxes and insurance, yay, that's great. That means they're collecting 1/12 of the annual tax bill and the insurance bill, putting it into an account. And then when the taxes, the insurance comes due, the money's there to pay those. And you're not, the buyer, borrower isn't getting, a couple grand bill that they hopefully been saving for. So I love it when notes have escrows. I bought notes without them. We do try to get them set up after the fact if we can. And you definitely got to make sure all this taxes and insurance are current. If possible, it's very helpful to know the employment and the income on that payor. You may or may not know that. Obviously, you would know it if you're doing a new private lending note, but if you're buying an existing note, that may or may not be in the file. You might also have an application or a credit history, credit report from the buyer borrower that's in the file. I always like to go to pacer.gov. And pacer.gov is where anyone can set up a free account, and you can check to see if someone has had a bankruptcy. And this is good to check on your payer as well as your seller if it's an individual. Now, they do charge about 10 cents per page. If it comes back with a hit, you want to see the filing, then it's about 10 cents per page, but that's pretty affordable. And one other thing we've added in the last few years is I'll check the payer out on social media profiles. Obviously, we can only see what they've deemed to be public, but I'll go to Facebook or LinkedIn, and you oftentimes can find a lot of information out there about your buyer borrower. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be reaching out to them at this point in time, but what does anybody do? I've been long past the dating, but I have a daughter dating age. So what do they all do when they go to check somebody out? They always go to Facebook, right? Or any of the social media platforms. So you can do the same on your payor. So now we're going to move into the other people in this 3 Ps, and that's the seller. So I'd like to know, what's the motivation for the seller selling? They might be recapitalizing, getting some profit, moving on to another deal, clearing out a fund. I want to know if I'm direct with that person getting payments on the note right now, or if I'm dealing with a third party. I'll do notes that a third party refers, but I like to agree whatever referral fee they're going to get and quickly have them get out of the way so I can deal directly with the seller. I look to see, am I working with a professional seller or a mom and pop seller? Don't be afraid to work with mom and pop sellers. They may not be as sophisticated as a professional seller, but oftentimes They are very direct, and you can sometimes get a better negotiation on pricing than you can with a professional seller. Professional seller, it's easier because they usually have their paperwork in order. I Google the seller. If I'm working with, especially with a professional seller or an entity, I'm going to Google them. And one of the things I'm going to Google is their name, the state, and lawsuit, the word lawsuit, because I want to know, have they defrauded someone in the past? Have they sold bad paper? Have they been sued? I'm not saying people don't get sued unfairly, but if you find somebody that has multiple claims that they've sold notes that were bad or didn't pay up on their JV, I personally, that would be someone I would choose to not do business with. So if it is an entity, I also like to make sure they're in good standing with the state and get some evidence of who can sign for that entity along with their papers, their LLC or their corporate filings, those sorts of things. All right, so we got the people and we've got the property, and now we're going to move into the other P, which is the paperwork. A lot of information, I know, and just stick with me because all this is very important, and you can make a nice little checklist for yourself on all of this information. So the preliminary paperwork, I want to see, in some states it's a mortgage. That's the lien that gets recorded on the property at the county that says you have a lien, just like a bank. It could be a deed of trust in states like Texas. And then there are a few states out there that still use something called a contract for deed. Things are a little different on a contract for deed. We won't deep dive into that today. Most of the ones we see are mortgage and deed of trust. There's a promissory note. The promissory note's the promise to pay. It's not usually recorded. A few states do, but most don't. That's the promise to pay. The mortgage or the deed of trust secure the promise to pay against the real estate. You want to see copies of any modifications. If the terms of the note, like interest rate or payment amount or due date or maturity date, have ever been changed, that will be set forth in a modification. Once you have all those good pieces of information, you want to match what they say and what you've been told to the documents themselves. Very important. I've had people say that interest rate on a note was 10%, and then it turns out it was modified down to 6%. And so those are things you just got to make sure you get the documents and you match it all up. Sometimes people don't mean to tell you the wrong information. They just accidentally do. But nonetheless, you want to match them up. If you are buying from somebody who was not the original holder of the note and mortgage or note and deed of trust, that means they got an assignment of the mortgage deed of trust, and those should have been recorded. So if you're buying from someone who's not original party to the documents, you're going to want to make sure you get a chain being links in a chain that aren't broken, of assignments, and also allonges. What are allonges? Allonges are like an assignment of a promissory note. So an assignment of mortgage or assignment of deed of trust, they get recorded, they transfer the rights, so the person who gets it has full rights, just like the original party. And a allonge is an endorsement to the note. Remember, the note is a promise to pay, kind of like a check. And if you took a check to a bank and it was not to you and somebody had endorsed it over, they would have flipped the check over on the back and endorsed it to you. And then you endorse it and deposit it. So that's what an allonge is. It's an endorsement that gets attached to the note. Very important if you're buying a note where the person selling it to you is not the original holder. If possible, I like to get a copy of the closing statement or the HUD-1 from the sale. I like to get a copy of a property insurance deck page. That's so I know that the property is insured and that the party, the lien holder, the mortgagee, is listed on there, just like a bank. And then I'll make sure that's my entity after I buy it. If there was title work done when the note was originated, I want to review it. I like to see if it's a judicial or a non-judicial state. What does that mean? Well, non-judicial states mean it's easier to foreclose if you have to. It takes less time and money. Judicial means it takes longer. If you don't know what your state is or where you're buying, you can Google it. There's a lot of good lists out there. Good rule of thumb is mortgages are usually judicial. They take longer and take more money to foreclose. And non-judicial usually means it takes less time. It's usually a deed of trust on a non-judicial. And a new one that kind of came along, because I've been doing this a while, in 2014, is if the note was originated through to a buyer that lives in the property, something called Dodd-Frank or SAFE Act or SAFE Act might apply. So these were things that were put into place to protect buyers, consumers that were owner occupants living in the property. It didn't apply to most of the time. It doesn't apply to land or to investor properties where the buyer borrower is using it for investment purposes. Now, if you're dealing with a seller financed note, there might be some exemptions to that, even if it's owner occupied. But that's just one of those things you want to get familiar with and understand or work with an attorney on, is if you're dealing with owner occupied notes. I like to look at the statute of limitations for the state. What does that mean? Well, states have different statutes that talk about enforcing liens. So statute of limitations says if a note matures they only have so long after the maturity date to enforce it. And this becomes much more important on non-performing notes, looking if they're behind, looking at the date of last payment and the maturity date. If you've got a performing note that's never missed any payments, you're probably not going to have any issues with that, but very important on the non-performing notes. Now, hopefully you're dealing with a seller who will give you this paperwork up front before you go spend money for final due diligence. But sometimes I've seen places where, mostly in portfolios, they may not give you all the paperwork up front. You might have to make your bid subject to all of these things. So if that's the case, then you would say my offer is subject to standard due diligence and review of documentation. And if you want to list them all out, you can, but usually just that catch-all phrase works. So, all right, we did a lot in phase one. We really got to know this note very well. So phase two is final due diligence. This is where you're ready to buy it subject to title. I always get an updated title report with an existing lender's policy, or if there's no lender's policy, then I'm going to get a commitment for title insurance and buy that policy to be issued after I buy the note. I don't buy deals without title. I know some people out there do, but I highly suggest you don't. And if they do, ask them if they've been doing it for 30 years. Never had a problem. Title is very important. I know we all get tired of paying for title, but if there's an existing lender's policy, the great news is it's to your benefit. You can just update it. It doesn't cost too much for that. If they didn't get title insurance, we see that a lot on these seller finance deals, and that's going to be a cost. Sometimes I'll pay it, sometimes I'll split it with the seller, but that's probably your biggest cost if it doesn't exist. Then I like to get a property valuation. If you know a real estate agent in the area, if you know an appraiser, you can have them drive by the property and give you a valuation. If you don't, you can hire that done. There's lots of services out there that will do that. So once those two items are in and everything matched up and I'm happy with the value, I'm happy with the title, I know that taxes are current, insurance is current, and I like my property and my payer, and I think the seller's in good standing, I'm ready to fund. That's the coolest part, right? So I can contact my custodian, like a Quest Trust and your IRA custodian, and let them know, give them copies of the documents, because now you're ready to go to closing. And closing looks like this. You're going to have a purchase and sale agreement that outlines the terms of buying the note, kind of like a purchase and sale agreement on real estate. You're going to have transfer documents. Instead of a deed, like you have in real estate, you're going to have an assignment of the mortgage or deed of trust, and you're going to have that allonge or note endorsement that the seller is going to assign to you. They are going to deliver the collateral file. So that's all those documents we just talked about looking. That's all that paperwork. Now, copies are normally okay, except for when it comes to that promissory note, you be really sure you get the original and you get the original allonges. If it's recorded like the deed of trust or the mortgage and they've lost the original, you can get a certified copy from the recorder's office, but you need that original note and those allonges if you ever need to enforce or prove your interest, which becomes very important if you ever want to sell the note or if you ever have to enforce your interest by foreclosing. And then you're ready to wire funds. So I like to review. I like to review those documents first, make sure they look good before I request my wire. Now, here we're going to do wiring. What are we going to do? We're going to wire our money straight to that seller and hope they send us the documents? No. I either want the documents, originals in my possession, but the seller might say, hey, I don't want to send you my originals until you send me the money. I don't want to send the money until you send me the originals. That's fair. We both have a very valid position. So that's when you can use a third party, like a title company or an attorney, to just do the handoff. So the seller delivers the documents there and you deliver the money there if you're buying it in your IRA from your IRA account. And then that title company will do the exchange. Great news is they can also record your assignment. They make sure they get the originals. Everybody's happy. Now, once in a while, we'll see a deal where the seller still owes some money on the real estate. Maybe they bought that subject to and then sold it. So if they owe some money, we're going to take that into account, make sure it gets paid off at closing, or at least deducted from proceeds so that we can account for it. And if you have a third-party servicer, which I highly recommend, then there's going to be some paperwork to transfer that servicing so that you or your IRA now gets those payments. If you bought it from someone who doesn't have servicing, this is a good time now to set that servicing up. You really want to have a third party servicing it because they're licensed for that state. And it just means you can go buy more notes because you don't have to deal with the servicing side of it. And then, as I mentioned, you record that assignment, which if you've done a third party closing, your title company will do for you. So now we're going to just kind of segue over here to these 13 questions I always like to answer because that was a whole lot of stuff. So we did a webinar with Quest called The Baker's Dozen, 13 questions that every note investor should answer before they buy a note. It's another way to look at all this information. Now, we did a whole webinar on that. It was almost an hour, so I can't go into it that detailed, but I just want to put them up here so you can see these summarized in another way. We've already talked about them, but they're just summarized in another way to make sure you don't forget. So how long's the buyer been making payments? Are they current? What's that value and condition of the property? Is there good equity? Is that buyer have good credit, or do they have bankruptcy filings? Is there a servicer collecting and validating the payments? If not, how can I? Do those documents match the terms of sale? Are those taxes paid current? Is the property insured? Is there title insurance, or do I need to get it? What's the lien position? Am I in first, second? What else is owed on the property? Maybe their buyer got out a second and it's behind your lien. Now that means you've got another lender making sure things are going well as well. It's not necessarily bad as long as they still have some equity in the property. They're not underwater. Who's holding that note? Who's the seller of the note being purchased? Where's that original note, that promissory note, and is it going to be delivered at closing? And my 13th one, I always look, is my risk versus my reward worth it for every exit strategy? We did another webinar with Quest. You can go back and watch in the archives. It's called What's Your Out? Exit Strategies for Note Investors. And we talk about 10 exit strategies for performing notes and 15 for non-performing. So I just like to make sure I kind of walk through those scenarios and make sure it works. And why am I mentioning this? Well, because the other day I was talking to somebody in our note investing mentorship group, and they brought me this non-performing note. And there was great equity in it. And it was going into foreclosure, and they're thinking, I want to get that piece of property. I could fix and flip that property. I'm going to buy this non-performing note. I'm going to foreclose, and I'm going to own the property instead of the note. I don't want the note payments. I really want the property. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. That would be great. But the interest rate on the note was 3.5%. And that buyer borrower has a whole lot of equity too. So what do you think the chances are that they're going to let you foreclose and take that property back? I mean, it was like a $250,000 note on a $500,000 property, and the value probably really was there. It was in the Salt Lake City area. It's more likely that that borrower is going, if they really do get to foreclosure and can't bring it current, it's more likely that they're going to sell the property and get some of that equity, right? Or maybe they're going to bring it current, or maybe they're going to refinance. Might be harder to do if they're already in default. All I'm saying is, if they pay that note off, yeah, you'll get your foreclosure costs back, but you're only going to earn 3.5%. So somebody was asking almost face value for that. So maybe it was a little bit of discount. Maybe they'd gotten 4%. So in that case, I'm like, is it worth risk versus reward? Personally, for me, no. I mean, if you thought you could get the property, yeah, but you might not. So you've got to make sure, to them, maybe it was worth it. Maybe that little bit of chance to only get 3 or 4% on their money to maybe get the property back was worth it. But I'm only mentioning that because make sure it's worth it. What's that saying is squeeze worth the juice. Yeah, I think that's how it goes. All right, so we talked about a lot of things. I suggest you take some of the information from here and you make your own little checklist. We like to use a PDF and an Excel. We have both kinds of versions, and we've got a great masterclass coming up that we'll share that. Or if you're going to Quest, we'll make sure Quest Expo that we have some of that there for you as well. So at a glance, because I talked a lot and I talk fast, so you can always go back and rewatch. You can always ask me for copies of the slides. I'm usually pretty good about sharing those if you email me. But just to take a breath and come back around to, after doing this for 30 plus years, where have I seen the biggest risks as a note investor? All right, so I've got it down to 5. This is number 1, title. All right, title. Make sure ownership and lien enforceability is there. Number 2, taxes. Make sure taxes are current, and make sure they stay current after you buy the note too, not just when you buy it. Number 3, insurance. Make sure that property is insured for hazard. I've probably, after buying notes, had more notes have insurance issues where they lapsed than anything else. So my servicer will keep up on that. And if it goes into a lapsed insurance, they have what's called forceplaced insurance that protects you as a lender. Because believe it or not, that buyer borrower, if they don't have insurance and that property burns down, I don't think they're going to be too motivated to keep making payments. So we've seen that happen on notes. And so as long as you've got a forceplaced policy, if the buyers let it lapse, then you'll get covered. Number 4, property value. Right now, property values are appreciating. But remember, I've lived through a few cycles. So I remember after 2008 when they were depreciating. So just make sure you have some cushion in there and that your borrower does too. And the payer quality. So how good is that payer quality? I just don't like dealing with payers that have been problems in the past. So I'd like to get a little less yield and have a better quality payer and move on and do more deals. So that's just me. Some people don't mind the problem notes, but this is just at a glance. These are your biggest 5 that you got to pay attention to. If you would like to access any free videos or ebooks, we have quite a few available. We have a nice YouTube channel. So we have a video series called Note Investing 101. It's free, and you can go to noteinvestor.com/101. If you put in your name and your email, you'll receive access to that. And our website is noteinvestor.com or noteinvestingtools.com. And my personal email is Tracy, Tracy, at noteinvestor.com. So all of those are things that I wanted to offer to you if you wanted to take a look at them. And I would like to now just come back on stage with Zach and see if we got any questions out there.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, we do. Fred. Sorry, I got dogs in the background.
That's all right. It's Saturday. That's what happens on Saturday, SDIRA. I got a contractor downstairs. I said, all right, for 1 hour, you got to be quiet.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm like a little Frenchie right here. Just, man, wow. But yeah, we do have some questions in here. I'll start bringing them up. So we have Suvarna. Fred, come on, buddy. Fred, come on, buddy. Fred. So we have Suvarna. He says, do you have physical offices of tax appraiser, or do you go to any, or do you get any additional information there than what they have online?
I don't go to the physical office of the tax appraiser or assessor. I'm usually buying notes out of state, so I usually get it all online. There are very few counties out there that aren't online anymore. If I happen to pawn one of those, it means it's pretty rural, and you could hire somebody to do that, or you could call them. But no, I usually do it all online. I like doing it from my computer in my home.
Absolutely. Let's see. So we've got some more. You also asked, where do you find the notes for sale, and do you work with lenders?
I personally like to purchase seller finance notes. We've done some past webinars with Quest. I know they're archived that go into the seller finance notes. There were 27 billion with a B in 2021 of seller finance notes. There's over 100 billion in inventory. People think seller financing isn't that prevalent in the range of 3.5% notes, but all that time where loans were easy to get, interest rates were low, appreciation, we still had lots of seller financing. Now that interest rates are going up and loans are getting harder to get, we're going to, in my opinion, having watched cycles for 30 years, we are going to have more seller financing. So that is one way that you can source notes, is to go to sellers who sold with financing and now they might like to liquidate all or some of their payments. That's one way you could do it. It's a good way to buy notes at a discount. Or you can work with people who are lenders. Lenders are different than seller financiers. Lenders don't like to sell at discounts because if they loan someone $100,000, they don't want to take a discount on that. So you can work with lenders. If you're working with lenders, most of them you're going to be working with are probably going to be hard money lenders or private lenders, and they're probably working with investors, because if you're lending money to owner occupants, there's a whole lot of regs that go into that. So, and some people decide to be their own lender, right? They decide to lend money out of their IRA. And again, if you're going to do that, I'm not an attorney, but I recommend you do that to investors, not owner occupants. Now, if you're buying seller financed paper at a discount with owner occupants, there are some exemptions to that for that seller. So just good to know the difference. So we do things like we send out direct mail to seller financiers. We do networking, like these great Quest events. We go to Quest Expo. We also are on social media. We do some Google ads. We do real estate investor groups. It's a great place to network with people to find notes. You can network through some of the private lenders. I know Wendy Sweet and Bill Fairman, Carolina Capital, they're private lenders. I know you've got other ones. I think Jet Lending. That's not me. I'm not a lender. I've decided to stay in my lane and get really good at what I do. So I don't lend money. I have seller financed real estate where I bought it and sold it on seller financing and bought a whole lot of seller finance notes.
Awesome. So next question is, what can be a reason why the seller would want to sell a performing note, and what due diligence do you do for a non-performing note?
So sellers sell for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes they want to recapitalize and move on to another investment. Sometimes they have something happening in their life, like a divorce or a death or an illness. Sometimes they just want cash. They want to go on a vacation. They want to send a kid to college. It really depends on if you're dealing with a mom and pop seller or if you're dealing with an institution. If you're dealing with an entity, they probably want to recapitalize and go on to the next deal. So if they made a loan, they get points and fees. They want to cash that out and go redeploy their capital. So that's a great question. I try to figure that out as part of my due diligence. Why are they selling that? And sometimes they'll tell you, sometimes they won't. You have to be, usually I say something like, wow, that sounds like a really great note. You know, if you kept it, you'd get all this interest income. What would make you want to give, you know, what's making you call me for a quote today or something like that. So yeah, that's usually how I say it without putting them on the spot. Right. What due diligence do you do for non-performing? All that stuff I said and a bunch more. If you've never bought a non-performing note, please have an attorney review it to make sure that it's enforceable and somebody's not selling it because they're having troubles for closing on it.
Got it. Right. So we have another question from Alicia. It says, if there's no title policy, who are you buying the policy from?
Title insurance company. Yeah, same title insurance companies that do real estate sales and mortgage policies. Yeah, just any title company in the county.
Perfect. Next question was, how do brokers or sellers enforce placement? Let's see. Oh, how brokers or sellers force placement insurance?
So the way you can obtain force-placed insurance, you can ask your servicer, your service entity. They will have somebody that they probably work with that can put it on right away. The services I work with, they'll do it on a monthly basis and just, you know, take it out of the cash flow every month. And then you can recoup that from the buyer borrower usually down the road. Or you can reach out to someone yourself, like Lloyd's. If you go to noteinvestor.com, you'll see Best of Notes 2021. Every year we get vote from people, all of you out there in the note investing world and the self-directed IRA, and you get to nominate who you think the best force-placed insurance company is, the best BPO, the best servicer, the best IRA custodian. Congratulations, because Quest won the last 2 years. So if you go there, you'll also see best insurance company for force-placed. So that shows you who people voted for. I don't get anything out of that. We just think it's fun to see, like, what's the best hamburger? We have sort of a best of list for note investing.
Awesome. The next question is coming from Randy. So, what are your favorite ways of finding the best notes? He also mentioned, good info. Saying thank you for it.
Yeah. You're welcome, Randy. I like seller finance notes. That's my wheelhouse. Some people hate them and they like to buy from professional lenders. If you like something in between, you could pull a list of seller financiers that have done more than one in 12 months. That's a kind of list you can buy. So there's somebody who's regularly seller financing, but doing repeat business. I love networking. I love online. My favorite source of notes is referrals because I don't have to pay for marketing. Yeah, but next to that is referrals, networking, direct mail, online. Those are probably my favorites.
Okay. And then the next one was from Shirley asking, generally, how much do you spend on due diligence?
Yeah, so that's the cool thing, Shirley, about the 2 phases. First phase is free, right? All that stuff I told you was free. It's as long as you have an internet connection. I suppose you could count your cell phone bill or your Wi-Fi bill, and that's not free, but most people have that. So that's free. And the second phase will depend on the title status. So BPO, it's usually $100. If I'm investing more, I might get a true drive-by appraisal over a BPO, so that might be more towards $300. But normally about $100 to evaluate the property. And then title will depend on if there's an existing lender's title or not. An existing lender's title, to date it down, will probably be $100 to $200. But if I've got a new lender's title insurance policy, that's based on the balance of the note, and that can run, $500,000, $1,200. So that's a big difference. So that's one of the first questions I try to get answered. And then those costs are just acquisition. So on a good day, I'm only in it, $200-$300. If it's going to be more than that, then I usually negotiate that into the price with the seller if I've got to replace title. And then you've got to calculate in, we haven't talked too much about this, but your servicing cost every month. So when you run your IRR, you've got to calculate in your servicing cost. Servicers usually charge between $20 and $30 a month. So you'll want to calculate that in. And then if you've got a IRA custodian, they usually have a fee. It's usually a very affordable fee that, to set the asset up.
Perfect. And so the next one was from Joshua saying, in general, are there certain states in the country which are easier to buy notes?
Buying them is not hard. There's certain states that it's easier to enforce them. Meaning that if somebody doesn't pay you, it's easier to collect and get the money back. And those tend to be states that are non-judicial foreclosure, that are creditor friendly and not debtor friendly. So Texas is a very favorable state for buying notes because they're non-judicial and they are creditor friendly. I'm in Florida. I like buying notes in Florida, but we are a mortgage state. So we're judicial foreclosure. So it can take a year and some money. You get up in New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania, it can take 3 years and a whole lot more money. So generally people, if you go to like Realty Track and you search for a list of foreclosure by non-judicial, judicial, if you look at the states that are non-judicial, they're usually easier to enforce. But buying them, the process is kind of the same, all the states.
Okay. So it's more important to factor in if things went wrong versus just simply the acquisition of the note, right? When it comes to looking at your states.
Yes. And there's some states where it's easier to buy because there's more of them. So that's a fair question too. So every year we do the seller financing stats also over on our website at noteinvestor.com. And there are some states there are 10 states that make up the top 70% of volume, that old 80-20 rule. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to seller financing notes, that source of notes, there are just 10 states that make up 70% of the seller finance notes. So it's easier just to find them in general.
Oh, man. All right, so the next question was from Mike asking, what's the average number of months you receive payment on notes you've purchased?
That's a great question. This is very interesting, and this changes depending on the interest rate environment. So a 30-year note doesn't usually take 30 years to pay. We see it on average, historically, they pay off in 7 to 10 years. Why is that? Well, they might refinance, they might sell the property, they might move. It's just something in their life has happened. So that used to be the number, 7 to 10 years. Then interest rates were unprecedented low. You're giving away money at 2.5%, 3%.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, a lot of servicers were reporting 3 years or less. And we saw a similar thing on our portfolio, but I like to look at servicers' portfolio because they service a whole lot more notes than just my little bit of portfolio, right? So they were down to 3, but on average, I'd say 7 to 10 years.
Awesome. So next one's from Joshua again saying, can you name a few good note servicer companies?
Noteinvestor.com, best of notes 2021. I don't want to look like I'm playing favorites because I use them all. So.
Yes, ma'am. So Randy's asking another question. So it says, can you recommend the best types of lists and sources of lists for direct mail? And can you recommend the style and tone of letters? Yeah, so they asked for a good bit of info. Any insight on that?
Yeah, we have letters and postcards and list providers and all of that good information that we provide in our trainings. And one that I can, if you go again to our website, we also let you vote on that, so you can see the list providers there too.
Perfect.
Well, that's free. I don't charge you for that best of 2021. It's just something fun we do. It's my husband's idea. He thought it was a cool idea, and we have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I agree. I like that idea. So it looks like that's it, guys. If you have any more questions, throw them in there. If not, you got Tracy's email. Tracy, do you want to put your email up there one more time?
Yeah, it's Tracy.
We can just throw it in the chat.
Yeah, Tracy, Tracy at noteinvestor.com.
Awesome. And guys, so go to Tracy if you have any questions regarding purchasing those notes or note investing. If you have questions that are more geared towards the IRA side, reach out to Quest, reach out to IRA specialists at questtrust.com. We'd be happy to help. Until then, Tracy, thank you so much for coming out.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Guys, you guys have a good weekend. And again, reach out if you have any questions. But that's it.
All right. We'll see you in person at a Quest Expo.
That's right. See you guys at the Quest Expo. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Hope to see everybody there. You won't be sorry if you go.
Absolutely. You guys have a good weekend now. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.